What's going on, everyone out in that land of YouTube? Hope everyone's having a great day. I'm Corey. This is Offbeat Motors, and today we're going to discuss horsepower ratings given to vehicles by the manufacturer. Stay tuned. Alright, so everybody knows that when you're online, because, it's the internet, and there's any mention of a vehicle's horsepower, and I'm talking factory horsepower, people are always chiming in, well, that's the underrated horsepower. Everybody knows the manufacturer underrates the horsepower ratings on their vehicle. And yeah, that is kind of true. They do, and there's reasoning behind why they do it, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I'm going to try to go over reasoning on why they do it, and hopefully show you how they would come up with it. Now, I don't know if this is 100% on how they do it, but it's the only thing I can figure out because I can't find any concrete evidence. I've been looking around and I can't find any, but I'm pretty sure this is what it is. If not, it's pretty close. So let's get started on that. First and foremost, why? Why does the manufacturer want to underrate the horsepower of the vehicle? Especially with all the horsepower wars, you always want, everybody thinks you want to have the highest horsepower out there, blah, 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 blah. That's cool and all, but from the manufacturer standpoint, and to be honest, more along the lines of a legal standpoint, you're better off underestimating the horsepower. Under promise, over deliver is the philosophy on that. So there's been instances in the past where manufacturers have overrated the horsepower and they've gotten slammed with it. One of the ones that I can think of right off the top of my head is Hyundai Kia. Well, actually, because they own Kia. They were the first ones that came to mind, so I looked it up to see if my memory was as correct as it used to be, because I used to work for a Hyundai dealership. And in 2004, Hyundai was sued in a class action lawsuit over the horsepower rating on the Hyundai Elantra. Hyundai stated it was like 140 horsepower, and the Canadian government, of all people, they didn't really believe it, so they did their own testings and stuff and found that it's actually under 140 horsepower, and it was 135 is what they found. So 5 horsepower. It cost Hyundai Kia $84 million in compensation is what they had to agree to pay. And this was at a time when Hyundai was growing. They didn't really need to go and spend $85 million on an overestimate. So that's going to hurt any company. $85 million. It's probably not hurt them nearly as bad as it would today, seeing how far they've come since then. But in 2004, they had just acquired Kia a short time before that, and they're trying to grow their product lines and everything else with both Hyundai and Kia. So yeah, it would have hurt them. So that's kind of why you want to try to avoid that at all costs. You don't want to have to go. The legal litigation alone is enough to make your eyeballs spin, and how much they have to spend on lawyers and experts and everything else. So, and it's a very lengthy process. So, not only do you have the legal litigations and stuff like that you have to pay for, but you also have to pay some type of penalties, and sometimes there's fines associated with it and compensations. So it gets pretty pricey. So if you can avoid that by all costs, you're going to as a manufacturer. So that's a little background on why they would want to underrate the horsepower on their vehicles. And now let's get into the nitty-gritty of how they may actually be doing it. Now, there's not an exact science in how a manufacturer is going to come up with their horsepower figure. But there's some variables that we can count on, and there's some we can't count on, and we know how things are tested. Now, when a manufacturer tests the horsepower, they're obviously doing it at the crank. Very rarely is it stated what the horsepower is at the wheels of a vehicle, mainly because you got drivetrain loss and whatnot. So back to testing it at the crank, they're going to do it on a dyno monitor for an engine dyno, And believe it or not, they actually do this with all the accessories installed. It's a practice that's been adopted, I think, in the 70s, maybe late 60s, 70s, somewhere in that area. They were adding the accessories, so like the AC compressor and all that stuff. If it came on the vehicle, that's what they were testing it with, and full exhaust systems for the ignitions and everything, because that all is going to affect the horsepower as well. So that's how they test them, and they come up with a figure on that. And they're doing these in rooms that are in controlled environments and whatnot, and corrections and this and that and everything else. So they come up with a number, and once they have that number, we'll just say 400 horsepower. You know, it's basically 400 horsepower at sea level. Now, they may not necessarily be at sea level, but they can compensate for that in the controlled environment, that is. One of the things you can't, account for out in real world is obviously weather, but you can account for, elevation change, because the market, you're going to look at the market you're selling in. Like, for instance, the United States, which is where I'm at, so we'll use that. The average elevation in this market for the United States is a little over 2,400 feet above sea level. Now, not all your vehicles are going to be sold above 24. You will have a great deal of them, but the vast majority of them are going to be sold below that, more than likely. So, that's just the average across the United States. So, if you take the average elevation for your market, in this case the United States, you can come up with an equation of your horsepower rating that you took on the dyno in a controlled environment at sea level. So the equation, I'll put it up here on the screen right now. It's going to be the horsepower loss is going to equal the current elevation, in this case 2,400, which is the average U.S. elevation, times 0.03 times horsepower at sea level. In this case, we're going to use 400 horsepower done by the manufacturer in their controlled environment. And you're going to come up with a figure, and then you're going to divide that by 1,000, and that comes up with the horsepower loss at the elevation that you selected, i.e. 2,400. So then you subtract that from the original horsepower rating at sea level, i.e. the controlled environment, and you're going to come up with an estimated horsepower rating. In this case, it would be right around 371-ish. Yeah, I did the math. If you think about that in retrospect to some of the vehicles out there, the Dodge Challenger with the 5.7 Hemi, it's advertised at 375 horsepower by Dodge with the 6-speed transmission. I'm using the 2018 model, obviously, because that's what I own. What I've seen, and this is what sparked me to kind of do this video, so I constantly see online that everybody's saying, well, Dodge is underrating it, they're underrating it, and it's more in the realm of 400 to 410. And if you use that information that I just gave you for that equation, you're probably not that far off, because that would actually put them, I didn't do the math, but it'd be right around 405-ish horsepower at the crank. So, is that the exact science they're using? I don't know. 100% certain. But it's the only thing that I can come up with that's close enough to show how they would do that and be in the same realm of what everybody's saying. So that's one of the ways they would do it, and why they would do it. So hopefully this will give you a little better understanding of that, and clear it up a little bit. And if you did appreciate it, go ahead and leave a like on the video, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't done so already. If you have, thank you very much. Also, don't forget to follow Offbeat Motors over on Instagram and Twitter. You can find us on both of those platforms at Offbeat Motors, just like you can here on YouTube. So, really appreciate you guys watching the videos, and I'll catch you guys next time around.